All right, so we're going deep today,
Yeah.
diving into Gen Z and like how they view politics.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff.
Yeah, and you sent over a bunch of research on it,
Mm.
articles, some going back like a few years even.
Mm.
And it seems like initially everybody thought Gen Z was going to be like super progressive.
Right.
Is that the whole story though?
It's definitely way more complicated than that.
Yeah.
I remember all those early articles, Gen Z, the most progressive generation ever. It was kind of like everyone just assumed they'd like follow this predictable path.
Yeah, I remember those.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny, like you can almost picture like, the stereotypical
Yeah.
Gen Z activists.
Yeah.
Like glued to their phone, ready to protest anything, any injustice they see.
Right.
But
Out there.
it seems like we need to look beyond those assumptions.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest things that gets overlooked is the economy.
Oh, yeah.
Take this U.S. News study, for example.
Okay.
It found that something like 70% of Gen Z are worried about inflation and just the cost of living.
Right.
These are real tangible concerns that are, really shaping how they're looking at the world.
And you know what? That makes total sense, right? Because it's not just Gen Z, I mean.
Right.
Like feeling that kind of pressure, that economic pressure, kind of like a lot of us right now are dealing with that.
Yeah.
So how does that economic anxiety kind of translate into their political views?
Well, I think it's pushing some of them away from, those stereotypical progressive views.
Mm.
We're seeing more Gen Z voters kind of gravitate towards candidates or platforms that really are focusing on economic stability, even if it means aligning themselves with like more conservative ideas. It's kind of like a pragmatic approach,
Yeah.
driven by the challenges they're facing every day.
So it's not just as simple as, like you said, slapping that progressive label on them.
Right.
The whole generation.
You stuff more nuanced than that.
Way more nuanced, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, our sources also highlighted this really fascinating kind of gender divide within Gen Z, their political views.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's a trend that's becoming more and more apparent. It seems like young women in Gen Z are leaning more towards liberal platforms.
Okay.
And, particularly driven by issues like, gender equality, climate action, reproductive rights, all these issues that really directly affect them
Yeah.
and their futures.
But at the same time, we're seeing like young men in Gen Z
Right.
more aligning with conservative ideologies.
Right.
What do you think is kind of fueling that?
Well, it's probably a couple different factors. Some research suggests that economic insecurity plays a big role in it. There's also a sense of, maybe marginalization amongst some young men
Yeah.
as traditional gender roles kind of shift.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we can't ignore social media.
Right. Social media. It's like this whole other layer of complexity here.
Exactly. Platforms like TikTok and Instagram, they've become these huge,
Yeah.
areas where political discourse happens, especially for this generation.
Right.
But, that comes with its own issues like this echo chamber effect,
Uh-huh.
where, algorithms curate what you see, often reinforcing, whatever beliefs you already have,
Right.
limiting your exposure to different viewpoints.
It's almost like being trapped in a bubble.
Yeah,
Like I've noticed that with my own feeds. Like you start to think that like everyone agrees with you,
right.
even though obviously that's not reality.
Exactly. And it's interesting when you think about that, especially in relation to the gender divide,
Yeah.
because research is starting to show that these algorithms can actually target certain demographics
Oh, wow.
with specific political content.
Mm.
And, potentially it's like making those differences between like young men and women and their political views even bigger.
So it's not even like they're choosing to follow certain accounts.
Right.
Like it's the algorithm itself
Exactly.
shaping their perceptions. That's pretty wild.
It really is. And I think it really underscores how important it is to, be aware of these algorithms,
Yeah.
actively try to seek out diverse viewpoints.
Absolutely.
Now, we've been talking a lot about the U.S.,
Right.
but these trends we're seeing with Gen Z, they're not just limited to one country, are they?
That's a great point. And, our sources did bring up examples from all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
There was this really interesting analysis of the 2019 European Parliament elections.
Yeah.
And it seems like those results really highlighted how Gen Z's political leanings are playing out on like a global scale.
Yeah, they really did. In Germany, we saw this big increase in support for green parties amongst younger voters, reflecting their concerns about climate change.
Right.
But then at the same time, you look at countries like France and Italy. Right-wing populist parties actually gained some traction, particularly among young men who felt left behind by, economic and social changes. It's this really complex tapestry woven with these local and global threads.
So we need to look beyond just, simple labels
Absolutely.
and national borders to, like you said, truly understand this generation.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what are the, deeper implications of all of this?
Well,
What does this mean for the future of politics?
that's a question I think we're going to dive into a little bit more later.
Okay.
But I think it's safe to say that, Gen Z's political landscape has the potential to completely reshape how we think about political parties,
Right.
policy priorities, and just electoral strategies in the years to come.
It's true, because they are, the future
They are the future voters.
of the electorate. So
Right, exactly.
what a fascinating future it promises to be.
It is.
We've only just kind of started to scratch the surface.
Yeah.
And I already feel like I'm learning so much.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's just take a minute and summarize what we've talked about.
Okay.
So Gen Z, not a monolithic group. We've got to remember that.
Right.
Their political views are being shaped by economic concerns, social issues, and then, of course, the ever-present influence of social media.
Absolutely.
And perhaps, most importantly, these trends are happening all over the world.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts so far? What's kind of stood out to you the most?
Well, what's really standing out to me is how much Gen Z is really willing to challenge the status quo. They're not just accepting things the way they are. They're questioning norms and institutions.
Yes, and speaking of challenging norms, one of the sources we had, an article from the New York Post, brought up something kind of surprising about Gen Z's views on patriotism.
Oh, yeah.
Only something like 18% of them said they felt extreme pride in being American.
Wow.
Which is a pretty low number compared to older generations.
Yeah, that's a striking statistic. It really points to there's this kind of disillusionment there.
Yeah.
For some Gen Z folks towards, those traditional power structures and narratives about the nation. They've grown up seeing all this political polarization and economic instability and social division.
Right.
So it's kind of natural for them to question, these systems they've inherited.
Plus, let's not forget, right, they're digital natives.
Right.
They've grown up with access to information from all over the world. They're exposed to such diverse perspectives. And those can challenge, those traditional narratives that we were talking about.
Absolutely. Their worldview is shaped by this globalized and interconnected reality.
Yeah.
They see themselves more as citizens of the world, not just citizens of, a specific nation. So maybe it's their sense of belonging transcends traditional borders.
That's a really interesting way to put it. Makes me think about how do we even define patriotism?
Yeah.
Maybe for Gen Z, it's less about, waving a flag.
Right.
And it's more about actively trying to make their communities, better for the world around them.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there because, that New York Post article you're mentioning.
Yeah.
It did highlight, this decline in those more traditional expressions of patriotism.
Right.
But our other sources,
What?
especially that piece from Teen Vogue, they actually paint this picture of robust civic engagement among Gen Z, especially among young women. They're voting in increasing numbers driven by these issues like climate change and reproductive rights.
So they might not be, expressing it the same way as older generations.
Right.
But they're certainly not disengaged.
Yeah.
They're finding new ways to, participate, make their voices heard. Kind of like rewriting the playbook.
Yeah. Exactly. And their approach is different. They're more likely to organize online, leverage social media for activism, engage in these issue-based campaigns. It's they're so comfortable using these digital tools to mobilize and connect with, people that have similar ideas.
It's they're building this whole new kind of political landscape, one that's more decentralized.
Yeah.
Digitally driven.
Yeah.
And maybe more focused on global issues than national ones.
And that kind of brings us to another interesting aspect of, Gen Z's political landscape,
Okay.
which is how they kind of interact with like history and political narratives.
Yeah.
Some of the sources talk about how young people are engaging with like complex and even controversial historical stuff online.
Right. Like that article that mentioned, Gen Z and their interest in things like Osama bin Laden's, letter to America. I mean,
Exactly. Like that's
yeah, really stood out.
Yeah. It seems like they're not afraid to kind of dive into like difficult topics, grapple with these different points of view, even those that challenge, what's considered conventional wisdom.
Yeah. It's like they're engaging with the past in a way that's like really relevant to like their present.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just accepting what they're told. They're actively looking for information.
Right.
And kind of forming their own conclusions.
Yeah, it's a sign that they're like really thinking critically,
Yeah.
engaging with history in this nuanced way. They're not running from like the complicated parts of the past.
Yeah.
And, that's really encouraging to see.
It is. It really is.
So, where does this leave us in understanding like Gen Z's political values?
Yeah.
They're kind of disillusioned with how things are, but they're deeply engaged in shaping their future.
Right.
They're questioning traditional ideas of patriotism and civic duty, but at the same time, they're using these new tools and strategies to make sure their voices are heard.
It's like they're standing at this crossroads.
Yeah.
Kind of looking ahead with this mix of like hope and skepticism.
Yeah.
Ready to kind of forge their own path.
Absolutely. And as we, continue on with this deep dive,
Yeah.
we really need to think about how these unique perspectives that they have and their experiences are going to shape, the political world in the years to come.
Yeah.
How are their values and what they see as important going to turn into real change? And how's their comfort with technology and their like global outlook going to change, the way we govern ourselves?
Man, these are big questions.
Big questions.
With like no easy answers.
No. But, one thing's clear. Gen Z is a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
They're already making an impact, and it's only going to get bigger from here.
And that's why it's so important to like try to understand them.
Yes.
Listen to them and really engage with their ideas, right?
Absolutely.
Their future is our future.
It is.
Okay. So we've talked about how Gen Z is like really questioning those, traditional norms. They're comfortable with digital activism and really like redefining what it means to be politically active and involved.
Yeah.
They're not afraid to, challenge things, shake things up.
Mm-hmm.
But what does all that mean for the future of politics as a whole?
I mean, that's the big question, right?
It is. It is.
I mean, as more and more of them reach voting age, their impact on elections, on policies, it's going to be huge. We're already seeing that happen,
Right. Yeah.
starting.
Like in recent elections.
Yeah, absolutely.
And think about those like key issues we've talked about.
Right.
Economic stability, climate change.
Yeah.
I mean, these aren't just like, abstract concepts for them, right?
No.
This is like their lived reality. So how do you think their focus on these issues will actually translate into like real policy changes?
Well, let's take economic stability, for example. We know that they're really concerned about inflation, cost of living, student debt,
Yeah.
all that stuff.
Yeah.
And this could lead to more and more support for things like universal basic income,
Right.
affordable housing initiatives, or even some like more radical changes to the whole financial system.
Right. And those changes could come from either side.
Exactly.
Right. It's not necessarily left versus right anymore. It's about finding like real solutions to these problems.
That's exactly right. It's about like what actually works
Right.
to address those anxieties. And then with climate change, I think we can expect them to really push for like bold action. I mean, they've grown up with like the impacts of climate change,
Right.
the extreme weather, the rising sea levels, all that. And so I think, this could lead to stricter environmental rules, massive investments in renewable energy, maybe even like a complete overhaul of certain industries,
Oh, yeah.
like transportation,
Yeah.
agriculture, things like that,
Right.
that need to change.
It's almost like they're forcing us to really face the future.
Yeah.
They're not letting us just, make empty promises. They want action.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got to remember, how comfortable they are with technology.
Yeah.
How do you think that might actually shape the political landscape going forward?
Well, imagine like a world where those town hall meetings happen in the metaverse.
Oh, wow.
Where people can directly participate in those policy decisions through, online platforms, and where like all the political organizing is just happening so fast across all these different social media platforms.
Right.
Their digital fluency could actually lead us to a more participatory, more decentralized type of democracy.
Okay, that is pretty mind-blowing. But I have to ask, are there like downsides to all this?
Yeah.
Could their influence lead to like instability or, some kind of unforeseen consequences?
I mean, I think there are always some risks when power dynamics are shifting like this. Their disillusionment with those traditional institutions. If it grows, that could lead to instability, right? Maybe less trust in the government.
Right.
And then that echo chamber effect of social media, if we don't keep that in check, that could really make that political divide even worse, make it even harder to, find common ground.
Yeah.
So
I see that. So it's almost like a double-edged sword, this Gen Z political awakening.
Right.
I mean, it has the potential for like great positive change.
Absolutely.
But it could also make some of the existing problems worse.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And that's why it's so important for all of us, I think, no matter what generation we're from, to really talk to each other, listen to each other, be willing to hear different perspectives and work together to try to solve these really complicated problems that we all face.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. We can't ignore them. We can't dismiss their concerns. They're not just the future, right? Like they are shaping it right now.
They are shaping it right now.
So to our listeners, I want to leave you with this. Pay attention to Gen Z.
Yes.
Engage with their ideas, even if they make you question your own assumptions. Let's try to work together to create a future where their energy, their idealism, and their tech skills can help us build a more just, sustainable and equitable world.
It's a future worth fighting for, and one that is going to be shaped in no small part by this generation that is just starting to find their political voice.
And on that note, we've come to the end of our deep dive into the world of Gen Z and politics.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.
It's been great.
Until next time.